quite often some people will feel very defensive and expect criticism. And we need to understand that that's not all feedback is. And some people are going to have that reaction, and we can change that. So, what we're going to cover today, I'm going to go through 8 tips that help you build teams in a culture where feedback is healthy and ubiquitous and helps your teams thrive and get to a high performance level. Now, this is a rather extensive slide deck. It has a lot of meat into it. So sometimes I'm going to skip a few slides, or we might go through some slides fast. I'm going to send you all of it so that you can have it all after the presentation. So anybody who's here can get this slide deck. And there's also some things we're going to go through where I'm going to have you try to apply it to a personal situation. And we won't necessarily have time to do that in the short lunch and learn. However, you can do that after the fact when you're reviewing the slides later. So first, let's understand that getting feedback right is actually critically important to building high performance teams, to retaining people, to keeping people engaged and high morale, to sharing a vision for how we're going to work together and how it's going to be a great experience for people, and as well to help teams and individuals through trials or crises. There's been a lot of research that shows really measurable business effects by creating cultures where feedback is ubiquitous and healthy. So one of the things, as I said, I'd like you to do is, as we're going through this, think of a real example. Think of some place where uh, it would be beneficial if you could give some feedback to a coworker or a colleague, or maybe your boss, or maybe a subordinate, maybe a vendor, but some situation where there's maybe some underlying disharmony or conflict, or some behavior that you would like to see changed, or some growth in skills or abilities. And think about that and try to apply that as we go through some of these different tips and techniques. So first and foremost, if you want to build a culture where you can have good, healthy feedback between people who are working together, you have to normalize it. You have to make it that feedback happens all the time. So it's not just feedback when I have a issue or there's a challenge. It's not just feedback when I see something I don't like. You want to have feedback happening all the time. So if you have a relationship with somebody and it's fairly superficial at work, it's probably not a well-developed relationship to give feedback, right? So you want to have a relationship where you're giving feedback on a regular basis and getting feedback on a regular basis. So what happens if feedback is a surprise? What happens if we're working with somebody and there's not a lot of interaction? There's not a lot of coaching, there's not a lot of gratitude or praise or reward or recognition, and there's not a lot of correction or guidance. And then feedback comes kind of out of the blue. People have a very negative reaction to that. They'll almost certainly be surprised. They will likely get defensive. They'll likely have really good arguments why, oh, Robert's just being grumpy today, right? They're going to find ways to dismiss it, and it's not going to give you the resulting change in behavior that we're looking for. So we want to build an environment where people know to expect feedback, and that feedback becomes normalized. And there's lots of mechanisms that we can use to do that. And a lot of times, like maybe even if we have regular gatherings or weekly meetings, just make giving each other feedback part of the process. One of the things we want to do as well is always be the calmest person in the room. So if I give you feedback, even if I'm angry, even if I'm really upset with you, if I give you feedback from a calm place, you're much more likely to hear that feedback and respond in a positive way. So again, our goal is tip number one, let's make feedback happen everywhere, right? So when I'm having daily discussions with you, I'm going to be recognizing what you did. I'm going to be appreciating you sincerely. I'm going to be honest and authentic in letting you know what I like about what you did in the meeting, and I'm going to be honest and authentic about what needs to be improved so that we can be more successful or that we can communicate more clearly. And what you find is if you do this significantly, One first indicator that it's working and you're on the right track is that people will start asking you for feedback. People will start coming to you and say, hey, what did you think about the presentation? What did you think about this plan? What did you think about how I handled this? And so that's a good sign. You want to be building an environment where people are actively asking you for feedback. And kind of the pinnacle, the nirvana of a culture of feedback is you get to a point where if you have some kind of performance or annual review, if you're doing it really well, people can write their own annual review, right? If I'm communicating well with my team members all year long, every week, day in and day out, coaching them, guiding them, giving them direction when needed, giving them recognition where it's deserved, they know everything I would write in a performance review, and they can write it for me. If you ever have a situation where somebody has a surprise in the performance review, that means their manager wasn't doing their job. That means their manager wasn't giving them good feedback all year long. Habit number two is understanding that we do need to balance recognition and correction. I, for one, do not want to be told only all the things I need to improve. Don't tell me all the mistakes I make or all my weak points. I want to also know, what did I do right? What did I do that you appreciate? So one of the things we do as managers when we're trying to build a good culture of feedback is that we're making sure we're looking for what people are doing right. And it can be little things. Thanks for taking care of that customer. Thanks for getting to the meeting early so we could review the agenda. Any little things. Look for what they're doing that you appreciate, that's good behavior, that's going to help the team and help them professionally, and make sure you take the moment to recognize that. If you want a behavior to be repeated, recognize it. If you ignore it, don't be surprised it goes away. This is some place where also, if you're a young manager and maybe your own personality or cultural background is one that you're not normally comfortable giving honest and sincere praise to people, telling people thank you, telling people good job, telling people you appreciate that, I would strongly encourage you to get out of that comfort zone and fix that before you start to give a lot of feedback that's constructive criticism. We'll learn more about why that's critical later. So again, going back to the example that you may think of on your own, in your own work experience, someplace that you want to make sure some feedback starts to happen, I want you to start thinking about right now, like in the last 2 weeks with that person, what have the interactions been like? What is the feedback that's been given? Has it been positive, encouraging, appreciative, or has it been more constructive and corrective? And the reason is we need to have that balanced. Go ahead and jot a note in the chat. Which one of those 6 bullet points comes closest to the example that you're thinking of? So a couple non-existent, a couple even, one mostly positive, about even. Right. Terrific. Thank you. This is critically important. So it turns out a lot of research has been done on this. And the way we behave as human beings, especially in relationships and on teams, is we need to have a critical ratio of positive, um, good feeling, warm, however you want to word it, those things that motivate, engage me, like recognition, reward, praise. We need a relationship of that to the constructive. Here's where you fell short. Here's what we need to improve. You actually need at least 3 to 1. If you are in any relationship, whether it's work or not, and that ratio is less than 3 to 1, those relationships languish, and they don't thrive, and people don't engage and be creative and get to a high performance level. So we want to hit at least 3 to 1. Now, it turns out we don't want to have 20 to 1 either, because if it's too high a ratio of positivity to corrective feedback, people aren't challenged, people don't grow. And so actually, they find that over about 11 to 1 ratio is what we call toxic harmony. Like we're being so nice and positive, but we're not being honest. We're not being truthful about, hey, this could be better, or this caused some issues. So there's this sweet spot. You can think of it like 5 to 1 to 10 to 1 or 4 to 1 to 10 to 1. That's where we want to really hit. We want to have it so that most of our interactions are positive and also there's regular constructive feedback. So for your example that you're thinking of, what would you need to do to change it to get it to 4 to 1 to 10 to 1? Go ahead and write this in the chat either. I need to do more sincere appreciation, praise, kudos, positive comments. Certainly, if you wrote that you have non-existent feedback between you and another person, you need to start that feedback happening. Make it a normal part of your day, normal part of your weekly meetings. You can even put mechanisms in place. So if it's awkward and different, maybe change how your meetings are raised, or change the process so that everybody comes to the meeting with 3 things they appreciate about their coworkers. Some mechanism to get this ball rolling. All right. And some people are saying, C, more constructive feedback, right? You might currently have toxic harmony where you're all being really nice and polite to each other, but you're not saying what you really think. Another thing to consider as we're looking at feedback and challenges and behavioral changes or performance changes is we do have to take a minute to kind of right size our approach. Um, the thing we tell children is don't make big problems out of little problems, right? And don't make little problems out of big problems. We need to take a moment and just realize, okay, for this one issue or for this one behavior or performance concern, is this a small thing or a big thing? And I want to size and manage my feedback appropriately. So just real quick in the chat, are you dealing with an A or a B? Is this just a, hey, I need to just give a quick feedback to this person on something? Or, hey, this is actually a big conversation and I need to carefully plan it out how I'm going to approach it because it's a difficult subject where they may get defensive or may misunderstand. Great, thank you. So it turns out that preparing for difficult conversations makes a difference as long as we prepare correctly. So if I just prepare my arguments like I'm a lawyer going to battle, that's the wrong way to prepare. But I do want to prepare in the way I want to say, like, okay, what is my intent here? What are the goals I have for this situation, for this relationship, for this person's development, for our communication going forward, for the team going forward? This matrix of goals I'm trying to accomplish and making sure that's my intent of the conversation. What is the behavior change or the performance change I'm looking to see? So all these things go into considering how are we going to plan for a feedback session that may be more than just a little one-off small feedback, but a more deeply involved feedback. And in this case, I also am not going to just plan what I'm going to say. I'm also going to plan how am I going to listen? How am I going to have good questions that show I care, that I'm empathetic, without giving up on the boundaries that I need to set and the guidelines I need to establish? So some principles that I'm going to apply when I'm planning out, I'm going to think about, okay, manage myself first. I want to be clear and calm. I always want to be the calmest person in the room. Even if I'm upset, I want to be calmer than the other people. Calmness shows strength. It's incredibly powerful. And I want to listen. I want to listen deeply. Even if I disagree with the person, even if I'm really upset about what they did or said or didn't do, I still want to listen. Still want to have understanding of why did they think this was okay, right? I want to speak with respect. I'm not attacking the person. I want to be highly specific. I'm going to avoid superlatives. It's not you always. It's in the meeting Thursday when you said this. Very, very hyper specific, no generalizations. I'm concerned about the strength of the relationship. I want the relationship to be growing and more open and more professional. I want to get to a point that we're going to have some kind of action item, that we're going to do something after this discussion. And I want to keep in mind, we do not have to agree, right? We could have a situation where like maybe your background or your value systems looks at something significantly different than I look at it. We don't have to come to an agreement. We just have to come to a decision on how we can work together going forward. We need to come to a point where we empathize with each other, even if we don't agree with each other, and we can agree on a step forward. All right. Habit number 3. We're cruising along here. Prep before you make those tough decisions. Know your purpose. Choose the right time and a place. Gather specific facts and examples. Now, notice I'm saying gather facts and examples. Do not gather opinions and do not gather up people who agree you're right and they're wrong. That's not helpful. But just real data. Make sure your mindset is in the right place, that you're thinking of what am I really trying to get here? What do I really want to see as an outcome? And can I imagine that positive outcome? So when you're dealing with your own specific examples, especially ones that are more complex, take the time to kind of go through these 5 steps and think of these things as you prepare for those conversations. Next, let's practice a little prospective hindsight and think, okay, what could go wrong? When I have this conversation, when I'm having this session where we're giving some significant feedback to somebody on maybe a significant performance or behavior issue, I'm going to think, okay, what are the kind of things this person might fear? Not that I can read their mind, but we can kind of anticipate how somebody might react to certain situations. So think of the different things they might fear and also think of what they might hope for. From their view, what would be a really ideal outcome of this conversation or upcoming multiple conversations? And again, what you're going to do is you're going to apply that to your personal situation that you're thinking of and come up with, okay, what's something they might fear? What's something they may hope for? And that may change how you approach the conversation because you're putting yourself in their shoes. This is you using a mechanism to empathize with the other person before the conversation, to understand maybe what they might be fearing, maybe what they might be hoping for. All right, habit number 4, avoid the bad news sandwich. So, bad news sandwich is where I take a positive comment, like a slice of bread, and put a positive comment before a corrective feedback, and then end it with a positive comment. And on the surface, this looks good. It kind of helps us meet that 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio. It gets us at 2-to-1 right now. And it was a very common young manager hack that was taught in the 80s and 90s, and some places still teach it. And it does work okay in a small subset. Like if you have a fairly new relationship and you have a fairly minor correction, you can probably get away with a bad news sandwich. Unfortunately, what we find though is in most situations, the research shows that it just doesn't work and it leaves people confused. They either hear only the bad news and don't hear the good news, or they hear the good feedback and they think that the bad feedback wasn't that important because of how it was framed. And while it's easier for the person who's giving the feedback, because it takes away some of the uncomfortableness and the awkward, uneasy emotions of giving people constructive feedback. It turns out that people view it as being inauthentic, and it makes you seem and appear as a less confident leader. So when at all possible, I would avoid this technique. So in your example, just make it real. You know, rather than a bad news sandwich of, hey, you did a great job on the report, but your analysis needs work. I know you worked really hard. which is that ambiguous, leaves people not knowing where they're really at. Hey, I'd like to talk to you about the analysis section of the report. A few errors impacted the results. I want us to prevent that next time. Just be direct. Just be simple, direct, deal with what you want to deal with. Clarity is being clear with somebody is more important than you being comfortable as you're giving the feedback. Habit number 5, model vulnerability by asking people for feedback. It turns out that if I build a culture where I am normally asking people that work for me and work with me for feedback, they are much more receptive to feedback I give them. And so this is a great thing you can do as a leader or a manager is just go out and ask people, like make excuses to ask the people who work for you for feedback on something, right? So if you're in a meeting and you're giving a presentation to a client and one of your colleagues is in that meeting, after the meeting, like don't ask them an open-ended question like, how did I do in the meeting? Because your answer you'll get is fine. But ask them a specific question like, tell me one thing I could do better next time I give a meeting like that. And so you're kind of putting them in a corner where they have to give you one thing. And doing that normally, commonly, maybe after every meeting, maybe after every customer visit, maybe after every uh, team meeting every week, will build this concept in people that, oh, feedback is normal. Robert values my feedback. When Robert gives me feedback, I'm going to be more open to it. So here's some examples of vulnerability phrases that you can use. Again, I'm going to send you these slide deck. You'll have these to refer to. But just get in the mode where these become part of how you interact with your teammates, with your colleagues, with your vendors, with your boss. So again, apply this to your own example. Next, let's talk about frameworks and models that we use for feedback. And I'm only going to talk about 2 or 3 here. There's lots of other ones. When we're giving feedback, the language we use and the way we present the feedback actually matters a great deal. A very common one is the SBI model for feedback. This is situation, behavior, impact, right? So you say, okay, when you showed up late for the meeting on Friday, that's the situation and the behavior. What was the impact? 10 people were waiting around. We wish you would let us know that you're going to be late. We would have changed something, right? Whatever it is, be highly specific. And almost all feedback framework models focus on 2 things. One is be highly specific, and the second one is listen and empathize and build empathy. Now, one of my favorite ones is by Anthony Mercino. That's called the Getting Clear technique, which is like the SBI, but it's like one better. And it's when you did something specific or failed to do something specific. When you failed to copy me on the email, I felt whatever, betrayed, hurt, confused. Throw in an emotion word into your response because this is what I need and what I want. This is what I want. This is a very powerful tech for getting feedback in a way that's unlikely to make the other person get defensive. And the reason for that is because you told them how it made you feel. If I tell you when you did this one specific thing, I felt scared, I felt frustrated, I felt angry, whatever it is, that typically builds empathy. And it makes the other person feel like I'm not attacking them, right? I'm not attacking them for what they did. I'm sharing how it made me feel. Really good way to start a difficult feedback session that's less likely to turn into unhealthy conflict. Another great model is the Grows coaching model. And there's some other models that you can look into, but always like if it's a intense feedback or even as part of your day-to-day feedback, get used to using a model that works for you and keep in mind being specific and keep in mind you're trying to build empathy and you're trying to build an environment where maybe you can listen to what the other person has to say as well. So when you're trying to apply this, pick one of those, pick a model and move forward. Now a little bit more, let's explore a little bit more of what's happening when we're giving feedback. Do we know how we're presenting ourselves? If we give feedback from a mindset of we don't think things are going to get better, that feedback is not likely to cause the change in performance or change in behavior that we want to see. And so there's a few aspects of our mindset that we have to have right before we give feedback. And so one is I want to be in a hopeful and courageous mindset. I want to be hopeful for how well this is going to go, the change in behavior I'm likely to see, the fact that the person is going to know I care about the work and I care about them as a person, and I'm going to be courageous and not overprotective or over positive, right? So that hopeful and courageous is where we want to be to give good, constructive, candid feedback. So I'm going to balance my confidence and my candor with some empathy. Habit number 5. Now, normally I say keep the focus on we, keep the focus on us, but we want to avoid using the word you. Language matters. If I'm dealing with a difficult situation and maybe a performance or behavioral concern that needs to change, when I talk about you or you did, it really puts the person in a place where they may feel defensive, they may feel they're getting blamed, they may feel I'm not being understanding or I don't see the whole picture, which is almost certainly true. We can rephrase things using I to kind of tip the scale so these conversations go differently. So a really good example is you should fix this. Hey, you should fix this. That seems like direct, good directing. You should do this way. Turns out that one's really loaded because it starts with you. You're directing somebody as if you have all the answers and you don't care what they have to say, but you're also using the word should. And should is a word that we would benefit from getting out of our vocabulary completely because it's judgmental, it's closed-minded. Um, I don't like the word should at all. Whereas if I say, I'd appreciate it if we could work together on a solution, or it might be beneficial if we did this, it opens conversation in a way that people are likely to respond more positively to. Another mindset we want to consider as well is this concept of, you know, am I going to keep quiet or I'm going to get directly challenged? Um, do I really care about this person or I not care about this person as much as I could? And radical candor is this concept of I'm going to be super clear and also really, really care about my colleague or my coworker or my subordinate as an individual. This is a really great mindset to have while we're giving feedback. All right, let's move on. A few more. Number 7, don't just correct, use coaching. Now, we all have different leadership styles. Some of us are very autocratic, some of us are very delegatory, affiliative, maybe even quite laissez-faire. Coaching style is one that's beneficial for us all to learn how to use when it comes to giving feedback. Rather than telling people what they should do or directing them in an autocratic way, focusing on their development, encouraging their growth, their thought process, their solutions, and helping them build up their ability so that they can handle more and more is a really powerful tool that you can apply while you're giving feedback. So some tips for doing that, show curiosity rather than just your conclusions and solutions. You may have your conclusions, and sometimes you have to just state those, but being curious, what's their view? What's their world like? What does it look like from their perspective? Now, you don't have to disagree with them. You're just trying to understand them. Ask open-ended questions and draw out their perspectives, even if you don't agree. So it's really important that we're not trying to agree with people. We're trying to understand people. Signal to people that you value their input. Now, I ran customer support globally for about 20 years, and much of my job was having customers call up and scream at us. And usually the customer was wrong. Usually the customer was using the product wrong, or they didn't understand something, or they didn't read the email we sent them with the directions. The best thing you can do is not worry that we don't agree. It's just thank you for calling. I appreciate you sharing what's your concern is, right? Validate their input. Doesn't mean you're agreeing with them. Thank them for sharing. Remain calm. Again, if you're the calmer person in the room, it's incredibly powerful and it reduces their defensiveness and their likelihood of attacking you. Actively listen and then ask them questions and ask them how you can help. This ability to be curious helps us put in a position where we can coach and guide people well. So here's a library of some example coaching questions that you can apply. What are 2 or 3 ways we could approach this? Right. So rather than maybe you know a good way to handle something, but instead of just telling them that, say, hey, what are 2 or 3 ways you think we could handle that? And get them to discuss them and discuss the pros and cons of it. And quickly it becomes a conversation. So again, with your example, I would look for some examples of a coaching style statement that could apply and work where that makes sense for you. All right, we're doing great. I love it. Habit number 8, follow up. So never give feedback. I hate using superlatives like never and always, but I use them once in a while. Never give feedback without planning and following up. It's a waste of time, right? If I give you feedback and then I don't come back and see uh, how that landed, did you try? Is the change in behavior or change in performance happening or at least on track to get there? If I don't follow up, that signals to the people I gave feedback to that my feedback was not important. Or maybe it was just, I was in a bad mood that day, so I gave you some constructive feedback. Um, Follow up is as important as the feedback. You need to make sure you plan on it. You need to make sure you do it. It shows people that this was not just a fleeting thought that went through my mind. Boy, it'd be nice if you didn't. It's actually, no, this matters, and let's help make sure it actually happens. People are 95% more likely to complete a goal when they schedule check-ins and accountability, right? It's just known that you're going to have a higher level of engagement, you're going to have better performance, you're going to have those behavioral and performance changes that you want to see only because you take the time to follow up, to revisit it. So we're going to do 2 things now. First, I'm going to open it up for just general questions, and we'll have a few of those. And then if we still have time, we'll do a poll to pick a follow-on focus area topic. So let's just start with, everybody who's on the call, there's not that many people. I'd really like to get one question from each person. So you can unmute and ask a question or raise your hand, or you can write it in the chat. And I'm a teacher, so I don't mind calling on people if nobody asks a question.
Um, Maybe I could go first.
Yes, thank you.
Um, it was interesting that when we came across, the sandwich method, we had an entire conversation saying that it's probably not the best way to go about things. Interestingly, I think when I am expected to give any sort of critical feedback, I think I tend to be very reluctant to go for the kill directly. I'm usually like, you know what, this was great and stuff, but why don't we look at this wherein it feels like a better way of doing it? Because somewhere in my head, I felt like going directly for the kill felt like antagonizing somebody and sort of not appreciating what they did.
So that's a great comment, and I'm gonna dissect it a little bit. And you're right, it does feel different to you. It feels, and we need to remember that feelings aren't facts. Feelings just made it more comfortable for you to give the feedback. It doesn't mean the feedback was going to be more effective or land better or that you'd seem like a better leader. Now, the other thing, like you use the phrase go in for the kill. And I want to just dissect that a little bit because you understand, like when I give like harsh constructive feedback, like if I say, hey, you really shat the bed on that presentation, right? Let's talk about how, I don't consider that going for the kill. I consider that I care about you and I want to help you. And I care about your performance and your growth and I want to help you. So I think there's a mindset that we have to be careful of is that we think that something is uncomfortable and is something telling somebody they need to improve is somehow negative. And it's not, it's uncomfortable. There's a difference, right? Nobody likes to hear where they have to improve initially. But then after they improve, they love it, right? Hey, you really helped me. I'm better at presenting now. Um, so you're right. It is much more comfortable. Well, the most comfortable thing is don't give the feedback at all, right?
Totally.
Yeah, just ignore it, right? Or I'm going to water it down so much that I don't feel bad telling you. Um, the other thing that happens is sometimes we're in a position where we it's beneficial for us to give constructive feedback to the person, but we haven't yet built a culture where feedback is normal. So it's out of place and awkward and hard.
No, I think that makes sense. Yeah. I think it was the point about sometimes when you give both kinds of feedback, it's almost confusing wherein you're like, hey, am I being praised or am I being called out? I really don't
It's
know.
always confusing for the listener. It is
Yeah.
always like, and you don't know, are they going to hear none of it, just the constructive part, or just the good part?
Yeah.
Um,
I think we all have our own selective biases in that. Yeah.
so it goes back to what is my goal? Is my goal to have this conversation in a way that I feel most comfortable? Or is my goal to have this conversation in a way that we're most likely to see the desired change in performance or behavior? So
I
if you
guess
want to be a
the
leader,
latter.
you have to let go of yourself being comfortable. You being comfortable is not a big goal. It's
True. Yeah.
not a priority.
Yeah.
All right, let's hear a couple more questions.
I have one.
Go ahead.
Do these techniques and tools apply well when talking to your own boss or manager, or are they really mostly applicable for your own direct reports? And how would you navigate a difficult conversation or feedback with that level person?
So my favorite answer I always give in class is it depends, right? So it depends on your relationship with your boss. The one thing I would say is there's a practice that we label the practice truth telling. So just being honest with your boss and this is where I'm going to flip FLACA slides. I really love the one in green here. This tech, like, so if I have a boss and I'll give you an example. Back in the day, I'm going to really date myself here. Okay. I learned to give presentations at conferences back when you had this wheel, a carousel of slides. You didn't have PowerPoint. There was no computers. You had like this projector and this wheel of slides. There might be like 100 slides on a carousel. And I had prepared this big slide deck to give at a huge conference. And my boss was supposed to give like a 2-minute intro welcome, and I was supposed to give a 45-minute talk. And right before it happened, the boss went over to my carousel and he picked out like my 10 best slides, the 10 like real hook conclusion slides. And he presented like basically he took all the meat out of my presentation, right? And he left me like now I got to go stand up in front of 200 people. I got nothing new to show them, right? That's a great place to like, hey, when you took all the slides and gave a 5-minute presentation that had all my conclusions, and then I had to talk for 45 minutes, I felt really embarrassed. And I felt I had nothing to offer the audience. What I really like is like that you would consider how that affected me and not put me in that situation. You can talk about that, right? I had a boss who once told me, I want you to call the customer and tell him this. And it was a flat out lie, right? And so it's like, hey, when you asked me to lie to the customer, I was really hurt. And I would like it if we could find a way to handle this in a more professional way without having to lie to the customer. I don't think the issue is worth lying over. So this technique for me works really well for managing up and for giving feedback up. I think you can try some other ones that may work as well, but I like this one. That's one tip to me that I would give. And in all cases, I would say still give the feedback even if it may not work. Right. So give the feedback. It's part of truth telling. It unloads you. You don't have baggage. You've made it clear. Now it's on him or her if they don't listen or respond or respect that. There we go. All right. Let's get one more question and then maybe we'll go on.
Yeah, I guess I can. I have another question. So, just like basically, most strategically speaking, if you try to give feedback, like let's say you adhere to one of these methods that you showed before, and you give feedback, and of course, you don't always know, like, does this person maybe have a bad day or something, and they basically explode back at you. Like, what is the process of, I don't know, recovering from that, because I've seen the situation play out before, and in most circumstances, the topic was just that dead afterwards. And so basically, like, what do you do if maybe you just, you got the wrong timing, maybe?
Right. So that's a great question. And the answer is again, it depends. How important is the issue? Is the issue one that you can just forget about? How important is the relationship? Is it important that you have a relationship that you can give feedback to each other? Or is a relationship that you're not going to have a lot of future interactions with? If it's an important relationship and you're going to have future interactions and it's important that feedback be given and received respectfully, then I would circle back to it. And I might use the getting clear technique. Hey, when I tried to explain to you what was happening with this error or whatever it was, uh, I felt like you got really hostile and blew up at me. I'd like to be able to discuss it calmly. Is there a time we could do that? You know, and sometimes you need to bring in a moderator, right? Depends on the situation. Sometimes, now a moderator is not you go find somebody who agrees you're right and they're wrong. That's more of a lynch mob. You're looking for somebody who can just like help keep the conversation on track, help mold the conflict so that you're using healthy conflict techniques, not unhealthy contact techniques. Um, if it's important, you don't want to just smooth over and ignore it, though. I mean, there's going to be conflict in the workplace. And by the way, I want conflict in the workplace, right? The fact that you've got somebody who can yell at you and tell you, "Hey, I think you're full of it." That's very helpful. It may not be the most professional approach, right? So I would, thanks for sharing. Maybe let's talk about it over lunch, or let's circle back on it when I clearly came at a bad time. Can we circle back on this, tomorrow or something? Um, but you're going to have that, right? A healthy workplace has conflict, and it's conflict between human beings, and they're not always good at handling it. Once in a while, I even blow my top, right? It's going to happen. Um, so I would circle back. I would be honest. I would be open. I wouldn't be pushing for agreement, but I'd be pushing to try to understand the other person. Like, why did they react so much? And sometimes it's because of something nothing to do with work. Their car broke down. Who knows? Their mom's in the hospital, right? Or it could be that the issue matters a lot more to them than it does to you. In which and so like finding that out, trying to empathize, ask probing questions. Um, you know, just the fact that somebody got a little hostile and yelled at me is not an indication to run away and hide, right? It's like, okay, it's an indication that as of this moment right now, that triggered something in them, right? And it may be the event, it may be just like they're under a lot of other stress too, right? We're emotional creatures.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
All right. Okay, we have a little more time. Let's do one more topic a little bit, and I'm going to do a poll so you guys can pick the topic. We're going to vote on it. Let's relaunch the poll. Do you want to talk about receiving quality feedback gracefully, cultural and personality differences, upward feedback tips, micro feedback moments, or celebrating progress? I'm going to relaunch the poll, and the poll is reopened. We'll pick one of those based on the audience, and we'll just have a small discussion on it. Oh no, it's going to be a four-way tie. So Diana, you can answer the question we had before the meeting. Are you able to see the polls and vote?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
Yes, I
Alexis
can.
says no, and Diana says yes.
It must be that perhaps hosts cannot and
The
co-hosts
host
can.
can't. Okay, that could be.
Maybe.
That would be key. So I'll show you the results. I don't know what to do with this. So we don't probably have time to do all of them, but we have a three-way tie between B, C, and D. So I will touch base on them briefly. So cultural and personality differences. Understand that you might be working on a team in a region, in an industry where there's a lot of feedback, where people are acknowledging each other and supporting each other and giving direction all the time. That usually leads to some really creative, really high performance teams. And you might not be too. You might be working in a location where that just doesn't happen. People don't say thank you. People don't say good job. It's just expected. And there's also, it may be if you're in different regions, you may find that, okay, in some cultures, there's no feedback between peers, and there's never feedback up. There's only feedback down, right? It's only from the boss down. So some cultures are very hierarchically sensitive. Some cultures are very direct. I grew up in upstate New York. I'm very direct. I'm fairly direct. In fact, I've had bosses tell me as I was managing globally, hey, if you're managing people from France, you could learn a little tact. And so you don't have to, but you might be more effective if you're a little more tactful, a little more indirect, a little more patient. And so there's a lot of differences in whether or not people will give feedback and how people receive feedback. There's a lot of cultures and people and individuals, for instance, who might not ever tell you no to something. They would just say, that's difficult, which means no. Or they would say, that's extremely difficult, which means hell no. And it's a different language, it's a different mode of communication, and understanding that as we're giving and receiving feedback, there are both individual and cultural differences that come into play. And one of the things we can't get away from as leaders is to build high performance teams, we need to know our people as individuals, both our team members and our subordinates and our boss and our vendors and our customers. There's this whole aspect of, I need to know you as a person, and I need to care about you as a person in order to really have a relationship that's going to click. Upward feedbacks tips got 2 votes as well. So here's some tips, and I believe this was a question from Amy, is like, does it work to your boss? Here's some more tips on that. Ask permission. Could I give you some feedback? Can I share an observation? Can I let you know something I noticed during the meeting? Right? Like kind of, invite yourself, ask them to invite you. Like ask the question, am I invited to give you feedback? Stay neutral, professional, really focused on facts, especially when going up. Be careful of like opinions and values and beliefs. Doesn't mean you can't share those, but if you share them, label them, right? So it's my belief that, it's my opinion that. If it's a fact, you can talk about it like a fact, but if it's not a fact, label it accordingly. Frame things so they're connected to what we're trying to accomplish here. So when working with a customer in this difficult situation, the ideal outcome would be this, and then you frame the conversation and the feedback around that. Or when dealing with a difficult employee, let's talk about the shared goals of what we'd like to have for that employee and for the team and for the company, and then frame the feedback in that vein. And always, always when you're managing up and giving feedback up, I would always say, come with a solution. It's if you work for me, it's okay if you give me feedback that's kind of just pointing out a fault of mine or an error I made. It's okay if you give me feedback that's just kind of complaining about a situation. However, it's far, far better if you come to me with a proposed solution. Can we in the future do this? Next time, could you do this? Right? Come with me. The old saying of give me something to say yes to, give me something I can say yes to, and show me that you're not just pointing out a fault, but you're coming up with solutions, right? And I'll either accept that solution or we'll come to a different one together. Um, I don't think I would ever, very rarely, very rarely would I give feedback up without a proposed solution. What I'd like is this. How about if we do this? Can we do this next time? All right. And the other one that got 2 votes as well, makes feedback small and frequent. All right. Most of the time, you can give feedback in a sentence or two. Doesn't have to be a big deal. Nice work catching the bug. Thanks for staying late to help the customer. Thanks for cleaning up the mess in the foyer. Whatever it is, lots of quick, small feedback is helpful. And even corrective feedback often can be small. If it's small, make it common. Use feedback everywhere in your meetings, in your one-on chats. The only thing I would say is that if you're using an electronic form of communication as a text form, like emails or WhatsApp or your Slack group or digital messaging, the only ones that go there are the positive recognition ones. Any constructive feedback needs to be verbal, at least over Zoom or phone call, preferably in person. It's too easily to misunderstand tone and depth and importance in a text-based messaging. Keep things small. You want to have very rarely we need to sit down and have a big talk. You want it more often, like we talk all the time and we share important things all the time. And you can gamify recognition. I'll leave you with this. One of the companies I ran for a while, we had what we called the Eagle Award, and I didn't make it up. Somebody made it up and asked if we could do it. They came to me with a solution, and I let them implement it. And what we had was every week, every person would get a 3x5 card, and they write down 2 or 3 things that other people did that were noteworthy. So they could write, oh, Diana helped this student do something, right? They write down something really cool that somebody did that was worthy of notice. And then we'd pool them all, and all the employees would vote of which was the best, which one won for the week. And so what we did was that made it so that people were thinking of other people, noticing things they did, sharing with other people the neat things that people did that were beneficial, and then voting for a winner. And every week that person got an award. So there was an award that went to somebody every week for getting voted for. It was just a little fun game, but it turned out now we had much better awareness around the company of all the things people were doing. It was positive reinforcement for behavior we wanted, made people feel great. It was fun. So you can make some games out of these things, right? In your meetings, in your processes. Feedback doesn't have to be just, oh, something went wrong. We need to have a talk. All right, terrific. Thank you so much for this. I do have time for one more question if somebody has a question.
I think not a question per se, but when it came to the point of actually providing solutions, that is so true because when you come in with a problem, it's usually a problem because you had an expectation in your mind already. And sometimes when you come in only with a problem and not the solution which the other person decides to take can sometimes be much worse. And you can be like, gosh, this is worse than it was before. And you can be like, I could have just mentioned what I wanted. Now I have to go and deal with worse stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. That's a wrap for now. We will make sure that you have all the slides available, and I think that the recording will be valuable if you think somebody else in your organization would be interested in listening to this. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.